Good Wednesday morning. I got to get out of here, to tell you the truth. I got to go say Mass. Now it's St. Mark's. It's 5:15 right here. I got about 15 minutes before I got to leave. Lily's sleeping on the bed right now. But I want just to continue the thought because I want to show the preaching of the apostles, okay, and the disruption that had occurred. But even in John's great writing. And it's this, you see, it's just a thought, okay? I'm always going back to the disruption of my own faith, and it's refocusing in the 60s within the order. You see, religion is not merely cognitive. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's a way of life, and a way of life that is cultic as well as cognitive. We celebrate it, and we celebrate it liturgically. And our ethos, the ethic that comes from it, is inextricably connected to that cultic culture. See, the word culture, okay? When you fool around with that, you tap that. You are tapping a meaning, of a narrative meaning. You're not changing somebody's mind, as it were, in a cognitive argument, like in a philosophy discussion, okay? You are affecting every aspect of their view of self and the world. And it's elusive. Because you could say, if you raise it to a cognitive level, just like an argument, for instance, is one level of discussion seems, gee, it's no big deal. But on an existential level, the level of living it out, it makes all the difference. We live within our narrative. God, I'm having a terrible time. But you live within the meaning contained within the narrative. And you couldn't separate the pre-Vatican II church, nor should you have, between its cultic practices. The simple thing is the Latin liturgy, okay? And all the celebratory elements that surrounded it, from things like not eating meat on Friday, certain prayers, the rosary, the centrality of its pieties, they were intrinsic to us. They were intrinsic to the narrative, what it is to be a Catholic, and not on a cognitive level where you'd say you could write it all out, all right? Where you could sort of write an essay on it. It was lived experience, okay? You were baptized and brought into it, not by simple act of faith, but by a cultic way of life, okay? It was a mode of living. It was a mode of living and responding to one's values in life. See, okay? And all of that was wrapped together and probably expressed most especially in the ultimate cult, which is Mass, the cultic act in which we come together to celebrate the Eucharist. You see? By the way, by the end of the week, you'll see it in John, okay? The Eucharistic. See? What happened was in the Vatican Council, she looked at the liturgy, and I think there was good reason for it. We had really developed the liturgy into a really refined form. There had been a lot of reformation of the liturgy in the past 100 years. The liturgy was a shambles in the early 19th century, and it was gradually being restored and all the rest. We lived in a great age of liturgical reform. And I think John the 23rd and the council, members of the council, the bishops, saw that. We were not coming out of a need to reform the liturgy, but to move it forward in the direction it was in. We were in that direction. But when we went to the vernacular, okay, that was a key move. You could foresee it coming. You'd have to be a blind fool not to see it. Because the greater participation in the liturgy, that began in the 50s, not in the 60s. We all did that as kids. We all had our missals and prayed along, all that. We were moving in that direction. But what happened, it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, is that after the council, we applied the Vatican's position, the Vatican Council's position, the thing on the laity, on the liturgy, the document on the liturgy, we applied that right away. And that may have been a cultural mistake, not a theological mistake, but it might have been a pastoral cultural mistake. And in this sense, we immediately went into the liturgy, where the liturgy, when you can change liturgy, you do it gradually. because it is so identified with the narrative in the cultic narrative. We changed it overnight. And I think it affected, theologically, it was sound. Pastorally, probably was necessary. And it says we were moving in that direction, but it was the tampering of the symbols too quickly. I think that's maybe the right way. You don't touch the liturgy. The liturgy comes last in a reformation. If you are trying to advance or reform or move forward, you don't touch the liturgy first, you touch it last. It should express the development, not cause it. I am not saying anything right. What happens is we didn't affect the cognitive life of the church, we affected our heart. And it was disruptive. It was disruptive. I don't know how else to put it. I love the new liturgy, but I hated it in 1965, trust me. I made a joke out of it. I said we went from Palestrina to Ray Rapp. Ray Rapp is a local composer, a very good one. He gave us hymns. I think he wrote, they'll know we are Christians by our love, okay? We were beginning to sing in church these, and in the vernacular, no longer the Latin hymns. Let me show you this. I'll give you an example. Prior to the council, and really even immediately after it, but immediately, we were principally still, the liturgy was still in Latin, and our music was in Latin, a lot of it, okay? I used to direct it. Myself and Mike Savagna were the directors of our class, music, whatever you call it. We directed the music, okay? And we did Gregorian chant. Mike did more of the more modern music, the polyphony, multiple. You know what I'm saying. I did Gregorian. I love Gregorian chant. Gregorian chant's got to be one of the most beautiful forms of music ever conceived. It took hundreds of years to perfect it. We could sing. God, our class could sing. Well, within 3 or 4 years, within the council and after council, the Latin went. So did Gregorian chant. And so did some of the great hymns that were developed over the centuries. And so we were singing hymns now that were sung in parishes. And from my point of view, an aesthetic point of view was trivial. You got to know what we were doing prior to what we were doing after the council. Wow, what a shock to your aesthetics. What a shock. It obviously got much, much better. The music is fine, it's beautiful now, okay? It wasn't then. Not in comparison to what we had abandoned. And we literally politically abandoned it. There was no reason to have to, but it was a political thing. The liturgy became politicized. So did the art. So did the music. We lost the beautiful for the trivial. That's the truth. But then a lot of good things came from it. All right, the music today, the St. Louis Jesuits, John Foley, they produced great hymns, okay? The new era. But boy, during it, and it was cataclysmic because it affected the narrative. The lived narrative, the cultic narrative was affected way too soon. It was disruptive. And once you affect the cultural narrative, all bets are off. That's why people lost their faith. It wasn't over Latin. It was a disruption of the cultic narrative, the myth, the mythic story. A way of life was affected radically and rapidly. No wonder when Paul and Peter are preaching to the Jews, they're ready to throw stones at him. When Christ himself, he says he's the fulfillment of the laws. You're nuts. They're going to start throwing. What do you think? Because he was affecting the narrative, the meaning of their lives. And it is expressed narratively in the cult. When you attack the cult, for the Jew, it was the law. You do that, Sadie bars the door. You're going to wreak havoc. And that's exactly what happened. We've recovered brilliantly, but we lost 3 generations too. That's the truth. It isn't over Latin or this or that. It's the cult. The cultic narrative was affected. We believe within a culture. We don't transcend the culture. We believe within it and live our lives within a culture. You tap that culture's cultic element, you're playing with fire. And that's what happened. It was the rapidity with which we went at the liturgy. And we went at it too soon, too fast. We weren't respectful for the depth of the narrative.